So I'm the firstborn child in a gigantic Irish Catholic family. Firstborn grandchild, thank you. And as such, my birth was greeted sort of like the birth of Jesus, with a lot of fanfare and joy. And in fact, my family used to have parties where the entire event at the party was to put me on a blanket in the middle of the floor, and all the aunts and uncles would sit in a circle around me and just look at me. Just look at me like kick and coo and whatever. And I think the obvious question when you hear that story is, why not just pick me up like a normal baby? Why not just hold me? But that's something I talk about in therapy and not on stage. And so for tonight's purposes, what you need to take away from that is that I was born famous, basically. I thought fame was my birthright. And I thought so even more when at age 5, my dad got me a gig on the cable access channel in our town, being in a commercial for the new McDonald's Playland. And that was a hot ticket, let me tell you. Because not only did I get to spend the day at McDonald's, but I got to miss school, and it was like all the Happy Meals you could eat. And my job in the shoot, as I like to call it, was to come down the slide, throw my hands up in the air, and say, "Whee!" And I know I don't even need to tell you that I nailed it. I was amazing. In fact, I was so good that I was offered another gig right on the spot, this time a speaking role in a commercial for a smoking cessation clinic. But this one was problematic from the start. My job was to greet my actor father when he came home from getting cleaned up at the smoking cessation clinic. And I was supposed to run across the room, leap into his arms, kiss him on the cheek, and say, "Thanks, Daddy, I love you." But the problem is, my own father was in the room, and my parents were getting a divorce. And while I didn't know a lot about divorce at the age of 5, I did know that it was, at best, trashy to be jumping into another man's arms and calling him daddy and telling him you loved him in front of your own father 3 weeks after your father moved out. So let's just say it was not my best performance. And in fact, it was such a lackluster performance that I went on hiatus for a long while, from the time I was 5 until the time I was almost 30. And it was during that time that I became acquainted with the Andy Warhol concept of 15 minutes of fame, and I got a little bit obsessed with it because I wanted my 15 minutes of fame, and I did not want to waste it on something stupid. Like, for instance, in college once, I was stopped by a Swedish TV news crew and asked to comment on Bill Clinton's recent re-election as president, and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. You think I'm gonna waste any of my 15 minutes of fame in fucking Sweden? Absolutely not. In fact, how I thought I would spend my 15 minutes of fame was as a literary ingenue. I thought I was gonna write a book and be hailed as the voice of my generation and be like reviewed by Michiko Kakutani in the New York Times, and I'd be like in the literary brat pack and hanging out with Jay McInerney in Manhattan. But it turns out, and if you remember nothing else, remember this, in order to become a literary ingenue, you have to write a book. And I did not do that. So like many a failed writer before me, what I did was start a blog. And I thought, you know what? I'm gonna start small. I'm gonna take my readership and grow it and grow it. And what I said actually was that all I want is an artistic outlet. All I want is a place for creative expression. But friends, what I really wanted was for thousands and thousands of people to read what I wrote and to send me emails all day, every day, about how poignant and brilliant and funny I was. And then for me to get a book deal, and for Michiko Kakutani to review me in the New York Times and talk about how I was brilliant and the voice of a generation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and I get on the 40 under 40 list, right? But I knew I had to start small, so I installed this software package called Stat Counter that shows you how many people visit your site and where they come from and how long they stay and all this good stuff. And I checked that thing like a crack monkey, like it was my part-time job. And so I could see that my plan was, working a little bit. I went from like 20 readers a day to like 50 to 100 and eventually to 200. And that's pretty good for a personal blog that's really about like dating, mating, medicating, nothing much too exciting. And then one day I come into work as usual and I log into my Stat Counter and I see that the top line of my statistics chart is like off the top of the screen. It's huge. I have more readers than I've ever had before, and it turns out that someone with 1 million Twitter followers had tweeted something that I wrote, and it got retweeted, and it got posted on Facebook like 1,000 times, and I could see, I was like checking that thing, like I checked it, let's say for the sake of the story, 12 times, but it was more, it was like way more. And I could see that there were people reading me in like Finland and Austria and South Africa and Australia. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is my 15 minutes of fame. Like, it's happening right now. I'm sitting in this office near the Capitol, let's not say where. And it's happening, like thousands and thousands and thousands of people are reading something I wrote, and they're talking about it and commenting on it. And like, I felt giddy and like a little bit lightheaded. And then I was like, well, who can I tell? And then I was like, shit, my blog is anonymous. I can't really tell anyone, and that sucks. And then it got even worse because I was like, okay, well, what are they reading? And it wasn't this sort of like poignant essay I wrote about the difficult choices that single women face in their mid-30s when they want to have children and don't have a partner and the walls start to close in. And it wasn't this really funny story I wrote about the time I was in a wedding and my partner in the wedding party was a guy named Squirrel and he was 5'2" and he kept putting his face in my boobs. No, not even a story about how my therapist and I talk about how I wasn't held enough as a baby. No, it was a little something I wrote called 8 Signs It's PMS and Not a Worrisome New Mental Illness. And it was about how I like to pick fights and eat chocolate when I get my period. That's my magnum opus. That's my 15 minutes of fame. As one internet commenter said, this essay has single-handedly set feminism back. It gets better. It does nothing but provide fodder for misogynists to discredit women's emotional truth. Thanks a lot. And I was like, well, at least she said thank you. But the truth is, it wasn't that satisfying. Like, it was 15 minutes of fame in a vacuum, which is just not as, I didn't feel it as much as I would have wanted to, so I thought, okay, like, what can I do? If I really want this 15 minutes of fame, I've got to, like, take it back to my roots, right? What was the last thing I did that was unabashedly successful? So I thought back to the McDonald's shoot, right? Whee! That was good, you guys. That was really, really good. But, I've seen Super Size Me. I'm not going to be lending my face and name such as it is to McDonald's anymore. Like, we can't do that. It's not morally responsible. The smoking cessation thing was obviously a bust. So I thought back even further to me on that blanket, surrounded by a crowd of adoring strangers who I could really kind of barely see, and I thought, how can I update that for the internet age? And I was like, I know what? I'm gonna get a leopard skin blanket and a webcam. And a new domain name and go for it. Thank you.